In Milford, Pennsylvania, a young black woman's head was found in a bathtub, and her killer? He kept living with her body for 3 days, while the police ignored every desperate call for help. Her name was Aaliyah Brooks. She was 24 years old. She loved music, photography, and she fought for justice in her community. She was the kind of person who made you feel seen and made you believe the world could still be better. But Aaliyah's story is not just about one man's cruelty. It's about a system that looked away because she was a black woman. Statistics don't lie. In the United States, black women are murdered at twice the rate of white women, and cases involving black victims take longer to investigate. Sometimes they aren't investigated at all until it's too late. In Milford, the silence of the police would give one man the time he needed to do something unthinkable. His name was Michael Grant. On the surface, he was an ordinary mailman. He wore the uniform. He smiled at neighbors. He delivered your birthday cards and Christmas packages. But behind closed doors, he carried a darkness, a hatred, a belief that black people, especially black women, should be put in their place. And on the night of December 12th, 2023, that hatred became deadly. Tonight, you will hear the story of what happened in those 3 days. How one man's violence, fueled by racism, destroyed a life. And how a community fought back to expose not just a killer, but the system that allowed him to hide in plain sight. This is not just a murder story. It is a black truth. Aaliyah Brooks grew up in Milford, a small working-class town in Pennsylvania. Her neighborhood was tight-knit. Church on Sundays, block parties in the summer, and neighbors who looked out for each other. Her mother, Denise, worked nights as a nurse, and her father had passed away when Aaliyah was just 16. She stepped into the role of caretaker for her younger brother, Malik. While still chasing her own dreams, she had always been the quiet strength in any room. Not loud, not confrontational, but if someone was being mistreated, she would stand up. Friends called her the heart of Milford because she volunteered at food drives, organized book clubs for young girls, and posted on social media about racial justice. She loved her camera. She carried it everywhere, capturing life in Milford. Kids playing in the street, old men playing chess in the park, the way sunlight fell on the church steps at golden hour. Photography was more than a hobby. It was her way of saying, "This is who we are, and we deserve to be seen." In late 2022, Aaliyah met Michael Grant. He was 35, a mailman who delivered to her street. At first, he seemed harmless. He had that small-town familiarity, the kind of man who knew which houses had barking dogs and which porches creaked. He sometimes left her packages tucked carefully behind the planter so no one would steal them. Their first real conversation happened when he noticed her taking photos outside the library. He joked about being caught in the act of delivering the mail. She laughed politely. In a small town, friendliness is a reflex, even if you don't know someone well. Over time, Michael would stop by to chat when he saw her. He asked about her photography, her family, and eventually about her work at the library. What Aaliyah didn't know was that Michael had already been watching her, noticing her routines, following her online posts, and quietly resenting her. Michael was the kind of man who smiled in public, but seethed in private. He had grown up in Milford, too, in a family that treated racism like tradition. His father had been a police officer who told him that black people caused their own problems. Michael absorbed those words like they were truth. When he saw Aaliyah succeeding, loved by her community, he felt something twist inside him. It wasn't attraction. It was ownership and anger. By early 2023, He had positioned himself as a friendly neighbor. He offered to help carry her groceries. He asked if she needed rides on rainy days. She thanked him, sometimes accepted, sometimes didn't. But she never saw the way his eyes lingered too long, or the way he bristled when she talked about friends who were men. The people closest to Aaliyah noticed subtle changes. She mentioned once to her best friend, Keisha, that Michael could be a little intense. She brushed it off, not wanting to seem paranoid. She had dealt with pushy men before. This felt manageable. She didn't know she was already on his list. Michael kept his other life hidden. The late-night visits to extremist forums online. The comments under anonymous accounts, mocking black activists. The bar fights when he drank too much and said too much. And the police reports, the ones that mysteriously went nowhere. When women of color accused him of harassment. Milford was a place where certain people got second, third, and fourth chances. And Michael Grant was one of them. That protection would make him bolder, and in December 2023, it would make him deadly. It was the night of December 12th, 2023, a Tuesday. Snow had been falling since sunset, covering Milford in a quiet white stillness. Downtown shops closed early. Most people stayed indoors, wrapped in blankets, sipping cocoa. But in Aaliyah's apartment, the warmth of the evening would turn to horror. She had spent the day photographing a holiday charity event at the community center. Children posing with Santa, volunteers handing out winter coats, the smell of cinnamon and cocoa in the air. By the time she got home, her camera battery was nearly dead, and so was she. Tired, ready for a night of editing photos in her pajamas. At 9:20, there was a knock on her door. Through the peephole, she saw Michael Grant. He was holding a small package. He said it had been left at the wrong address. Aaliyah hesitated, but politeness won. She opened the door. The first minutes were ordinary. Michael stepped inside to escape the cold, making a comment about the snow piling up on the steps. He handed her the package. She thanked him and turned toward the kitchen. That's when his tone changed. "You think you're better than people like me, don't you?" he said. Aaliyah froze. It wasn't the words. It was the venom in his voice. She turned slowly, confused. "What are you talking about?" Michael stepped closer. "You walk around here like this town belongs to you, posting your little pictures, acting like you're the face of Milford." She tried to keep her voice steady. "I think you should leave, Michael." But leaving was never his plan. In his head, this was the moment he had been waiting for. Weeks of resentment boiled over. He lunged. The first strike was his hand around her throat, shoving her against the wall. She fought back, kicking, scratching, trying to scream. He squeezed harder. She gasped for air, clawing at his arm. The camera strap around her neck snagged against the wall, digging into her skin. Michael grabbed a knife from the kitchen counter. The first stab was to her side, the second to her chest. Then more, a frenzy, more than 20 in all, his face twisted with rage. When she went still, he stepped back, panting. The apartment was silent except for his breathing. Blood pooled across the hardwood. The warm, metallic smell filled the air. What he did next would turn the killing into something even darker. He dragged her body to the bathroom, laid her in the tub, and with the same knife, he severed her head. He placed it on a folded towel beside her left arm. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the walls of Aaliyah's home now held a secret too horrific to imagine. Michael washed his hands, looked in the mirror, and for the first time in years, he smiled. It was the night of December 12th, 2023, a Tuesday. Snow had been falling since sunset, covering Milford in a quiet white stillness. Downtown shops closed early. Most people stayed indoors, wrapped in blankets, sipping cocoa. But in Aaliyah's apartment, the warmth of the evening would turn to horror. She had spent the day photographing a holiday charity event at the community center. Children posing with Santa, volunteers handing out winter coats, the smell of cinnamon and cocoa in the air. By the time she got home, her camera battery was nearly dead, and so was she. Tired, ready for a night of editing photos in her pajamas. At 9:20, there was a knock on her door. Through the peephole, she saw Michael Grant. He was holding a small package. He said it had been left at the wrong address. Aaliyah hesitated, but politeness won. She opened the door. The first minutes were ordinary. Michael stepped inside to escape the cold, making a comment about the snow piling up on the steps. He handed her the package. She thanked him and turned toward the kitchen. That's when his tone changed. "You think you're better than people like me, don't you?" he said. Aaliyah froze. It wasn't the words. It was the venom in his voice. She turned slowly, confused. "What are you talking about?" Michael stepped closer. "You walk around here like this town belongs to you, posting your little pictures, acting like you're the face of Milford." She tried to keep her voice steady. "I think you should leave, Michael." But leaving was never his plan. In his head, this was the moment he had been waiting for. Weeks of resentment boiled over. He lunged. The first strike was his hand around her throat, shoving her against the wall. She fought back, kicking, scratching, trying to scream. He squeezed harder. She gasped for air, clawing at his arm. The camera strap around her neck snagged against the wall, digging into her skin. Michael grabbed a knife from the kitchen counter. The first stab was to her side, the second to her chest. Then more, a frenzy, more than 20 in all, his face twisted with rage. When she went still, he stepped back, panting. The apartment was silent except for his breathing. Blood pooled across the hardwood. The warm, metallic smell filled the air. What he did next would turn the killing into something even darker. He dragged her body to the bathroom, laid her in the tub, and with the same knife, he severed her head. He placed it on a folded towel beside her left arm. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the walls of Aaliyah's home now held a secret too horrific to imagine. Michael washed his hands, looked in the mirror, and for the first time in years, he smiled. For the next 3 days, Michael Grant lived with Aaliyah's body. Not hidden, not buried, just there, in the bathtub. The first night, he sat on her couch, scrolling through his phone. He opened her social media accounts, reading the last comments she had posted, almost like he was savoring them. Then he logged into his own anonymous accounts and left cryptic messages in hate forms, boasting without naming names. By morning, the apartment was cold. He hadn't turned the heat on. The air was heavy with the metallic stench of blood. Instead of calling anyone, he made coffee, turned on the TV, and began a day that was as far from human as it gets. From 8 in the morning to almost 8 at night, Michael watched adult videos. Not a handful, not a dozen. Over 170 clips, played on loop, while his attention switching between the screen and the bathroom door. It was depravity layered over violence, like he needed to feed both hungers at once. That Sunday, he ordered drugs from a contact across town. Surveillance footage later showed him driving Aaliyah's car, a red Honda Civic, to meet his dealer. He returned with a small bag of white powder and a 6-pack of beer. In his mind, he was untouchable. Meanwhile, Aaliyah's family was getting desperate. When she missed Sunday dinner at her mother's house, alarm bells rang. Denise called her daughter's phone. No answer. She texted, "Nothing." Finally, late that night, a message came back. "Sorry, just woke up." The words didn't sound like Aaliyah. She always wrote in full sentences, always used punctuation. Denise felt her stomach twist. She called again the next morning. This time, Michael answered, pretending to be half asleep. He told her Aaliyah had been drinking, was resting, nothing to worry about. But the tone was wrong. Too flat. Too distant. By Monday, when Aaliyah didn't show up for her shift at the library, her co-workers called Denise. They told her this wasn't like her at all. That's when Denise picked up the phone and called the police. But in Milford, urgency had rules, and those rules didn't work in favor of black women. The dispatcher asked if Aaliyah had a history of disappearing. Denise said no. The dispatcher suggested waiting a little longer. While the clock ticked, Michael sat in that apartment, feet away from the woman he had destroyed. He smoked. He drank. He walked in and out of the bathroom, looking at her like she was a possession he still owned. For him, the violence wasn't over. It was ongoing. And every hour that passed without a knock on the door proved to him that the system really was on his side. Marcus Reid was at his office on Monday afternoon when he got the call. A community volunteer he knew from Milford told him, "Aaliyah's missing, and the police aren't doing a damn thing." Marcus wasn't just any lawyer. He was a former prosecutor who had left the system in disgust after seeing how it failed black victims over and over. He founded Justice for Us, a grassroots legal group that fought for families whose cases had been ignored. And when he heard Aaliyah's name, something in him tightened. He remembered her from a rally 2 years earlier. She'd been behind the camera, documenting the event. She had sent him a set of photos afterward, free of charge, saying, "We need to keep the truth visible." Now, that same woman was gone, and he knew waiting could mean losing her forever. Marcus drove to Milford that evening. He went straight to Denise's house. The older woman's eyes were swollen from crying. She told him about the strange text, the phone call with Michael, and the dispatcher's dismissive tone. Marcus took notes, every word sharpening his focus. "Has anyone been to her apartment?" he asked. Denise shook her head. "They told me I'd need a warrant, or her permission, but she's not answering." That answer was all Marcus needed. He'd seen this playbook before. When black women disappeared, the assumption was always that they'd gone off on their own or were involved in something shady. It was racial profiling turned inside out, assuming no crime had been committed because the victim was black. Marcus started making calls. He contacted local reporters he trusted, feeding them enough to raise eyebrows without tipping off Michael. He posted on social media about Aaliyah's disappearance, tagging community leaders and activists. Within hours, the post was being shared hundreds of times. By Tuesday morning, pressure was building. Marcus went to the police station in person. He demanded to speak to the chief. He laid out the timeline, the suspicious behavior, the unanswered calls. The chief tried to stall, citing procedure and jurisdiction. Marcus leaned across the desk and said, "If you don't act today, this town will have a news crew on every corner by tomorrow." That was the turning point. Reluctantly, the chief authorized a welfare check. 2 officers were sent to Aaliyah's apartment that afternoon. When Michael answered the door, he was calm. Too calm. He invited them in, saying Aaliyah was asleep in the bedroom. The officers stepped inside and stopped. The smell hit first. Then their eyes followed the trail, droplets of dried blood on the floor, leading toward the bathroom. One officer opened the door. What he saw froze him in place. Aaliyah's body lay in the tub, her head resting on a folded towel beside her left arm. The room was silent, except for the hum of the overhead light. Michael stood behind them, expressionless. When they turned, he said flatly, "I guess this is where my next 25 years start." In that moment, the case was no longer a missing person. It was a crime scene. And the truth Marcus had been fighting to uncover was now impossible to ignore. The arrest of Michael Grant should have been the end of the nightmare. But for Marcus Reid, it was just the beginning. Once Michael was in custody, the police tried to control the narrative. They released a short statement. Suspect apprehended. Investigation ongoing. No mention of the 3 days he lived with her body. No mention of the multiple calls for help that were ignored. Marcus knew this was deliberate. The less the public knew, the less they would question why it took so long. So he made sure they knew everything. He stood outside the Milford Police Department the next morning, surrounded by reporters. He laid out the timeline, the ignored calls, the racial bias, the evidence of stalking. He told them about the restraining orders Michael had dodged, the history of violence buried in sealed records. This man was protected by the system, Marcus said into the microphones, and Aaliyah Brooks is dead because of it. The details of the crime itself were horrifying enough to dominate headlines. Reporters described the state of the apartment, the blood spatter on the walls, the 3 knives, each stained and left in different rooms, the search history on Michael's phone, how to dispose of a body, how long before smell, and violent porn. Investigators determined that after strangling Aaliyah and stabbing her more than 20 times, he had methodically placed her in the bathtub and decapitated her. He told detectives he couldn't stay in the flat with a full body. The words were delivered without remorse, almost bored. What disturbed detectives even more was how calculated he had been afterward. He used her phone to send messages to family and friends, mimicking her typing style, just enough to create doubt. He left the apartment multiple times, buying drugs, meeting people in public, never showing a hint of panic. At his first court appearance, Michael showed no emotion. He didn't look at Aaliyah's family. When the judge read the charges, murder and abuses of a corpse, he simply nodded, as if they were confirming an appointment he already knew about. Marcus sat with Denise and Malik in the gallery. He could feel the rage radiating off them. For them, this wasn't just about Michael. It was about every time they'd been told to wait a little longer or calm down when their safety was at stake. Outside the courthouse, Marcus addressed the crowd that had gathered. This isn't just a murder case. This is a black woman's life stolen, and a system that decided she didn't matter enough to save. His voice carried over the winter air, steady but burning with anger. The pressure worked. State investigators announced they would review the police department's handling of the case. Civil rights groups began calling for the chief's resignation. Michael Grant had been caught, but Marcus knew the deeper fight, the one against the machinery that had allowed him to operate for years, was far from over. Criminal psychologists who studied Michael Grant's case described him as a textbook predator, but with a dangerous twist. Most killers have a clear trigger: jealousy, rage, money, revenge. With Michael, the trigger was an idea, a belief that black women were beneath him, and that punishing them was a form of justice in his warped mind. He didn't kill in the heat of the moment. He planned. He chose Aaliyah the way a hunter chooses prey. He studied her habits, her relationships, even the times she was alone. That patience, that ability to wait until the conditions were perfect, is what made him more dangerous than the average violent offender. Forensic analysis of his online activity revealed years of engagement with extremist communities, forums where members shared racist propaganda, celebrated violence, and traded tips on how to avoid law enforcement scrutiny. Michael was a frequent poster. His comments revealed a man obsessed with control, particularly over black women he saw as too confident or too outspoken. The psychologist noted how his behavior after the murder fit a disturbing pattern known as possession maintenance. By keeping Aaliyah's body in his apartment, he could revisit his crime, relive the sense of domination it gave him. The pornography binge, the drug use, the casual movement in and out of the bathroom. These weren't signs of panic. They were rituals. In interviews, detectives said Michael spoke about the murder with an unsettling detachment. He described the strangulation, the stabbings, the decapitation in the same tone someone might use to describe fixing a broken appliance. There was no remorse, no guilt, only a matter-of-fact recounting of events. When asked why he did it, his answers shifted. First, he blamed alcohol and drugs. Then, he claimed he blacked out. Finally, he said, she needed to be put in her place. It was that last statement that cut through all the excuses. To the prosecution, it was the truth, unfiltered and damning. It revealed the racist core of his motive, and it stripped away any chance his defense had of painting the murder as an accident or a momentary lapse of reason. Marcus Reid read every page of those psychological reports. For him, they confirmed what he already knew. Michael Grant wasn't just a killer. He was the product of a system that had taught him black lives were expendable, and then proved it by protecting him for years. Understanding Michael's mind wasn't about sympathy. It was about evidence, because the more clearly they could show his calculated hatred, the harder it would be for anyone, judge, jury, or public, to dismiss this as anything less than what it was, a racially motivated execution. On July 15, 2024, the courtroom in downtown Harrisburg was packed. Reporters lined the back wall, their cameras aimed at the defense table, where Michael Grant sat in his beige prison uniform. He didn't look at the jury. He didn't look at Aaliyah's family. He stared straight ahead, as if this was just another day on his calendar. The prosecution wasted no time. They laid out the physical evidence, the blood spatter patterns, the knives, the search history on his phone. They played portions of his police interviews, letting the jury hear his flat, emotionless descriptions of the killing. Then they brought in the forensic psychologist, who explained his calculated hatred and the possession maintenance ritual he performed after her death. But the most powerful moment came when Marcus Reid took the stand. As a special witness for the prosecution, he told the jury about the calls for help that went unanswered. He explained how Aaliyah's family was dismissed, how the initial investigation stalled, and how those delays gave Michael the time to live with her body for 3 full days. This wasn't just a murder, Marcus said, his voice steady but fierce. It was a message that in towns like Milford, a black woman's life can be taken, and the system will hesitate before lifting a finger. The defense tried to counter. They claimed Michael had suffered a mental breakdown triggered by substance abuse. They argued he had no memory of the attack. But the prosecution dismantled it, piece by piece, showing the deliberate steps he took, the staged text messages, the trips out of the apartment, the calm interaction with police when they arrived. After 5 days of testimony, Michael changed his plea to guilty. It wasn't remorse that drove him. It was inevitability. The evidence was overwhelming, and the prospect of a drawn-out trial with public scrutiny was something his attorneys wanted to avoid. On sentencing day, the judge addressed him directly. "You committed an act of extraordinary cruelty," she said. "You robbed Aaliyah Brooks of her dignity, and you did so with planning and purpose. For that, you will spend the rest of your life in prison." She handed down a life sentence with no possibility of parole for at least 25 years. In the gallery, Denise gripped Malik's hand. They didn't cry. There was no relief, just the quiet knowledge that at least, for now, he couldn't hurt anyone else. Outside, Marcus spoke to the crowd of supporters and journalists. "This verdict is important," he said, "but don't mistake it for justice. Justice would have been Aaliyah alive today. Justice would have been a system that acted when her family called for help." The wind carried his words down the courthouse steps, through the line of people holding signs with Aaliyah's name. For them, the fight wasn't over. And for Marcus Reid, it never would be. After the sentencing, Milford was quieter, but not healed. A memorial bench was placed in the park near the library where Aaliyah worked. Her name, carved into the wood, faced the playground where children played in the afternoons. The same children she had once photographed for community events. Denise visited the bench every week. Sometimes she brought flowers. Sometimes she just sat there, listening to the wind in the trees, remembering the sound of her daughter's laugh. Malik, still in college, started volunteering with Justice for Us. He said it was his way of making sure his sister's name wasn't just another case file in a drawer. Marcus Reid kept the pressure on. He filed a civil rights lawsuit against the Milford Police Department for negligence and racial bias. He gave interviews, spoke at universities, and met with lawmakers about reforming missing persons protocols. His message was always the same. If the system can ignore one black woman for 3 days while her killer sits in plain sight, it can do it to anyone. That has to change. The case had ripple effects. In nearby towns, activists demanded transparency in how police handled cases involving women of color. A bill was introduced at the state level to create an independent review board for all missing persons reports, ensuring no case could be dismissed without a thorough check. But change was slow, and Marcus knew that without constant pressure, the attention would fade. On the anniversary of Aaliyah's death, the community held a candlelight vigil. The park was lit with hundreds of small flames, each one reflected in the tears of those gathered. Denise spoke first, her voice breaking but strong. "My daughter believed in showing the truth, even when it was ugly. She's not here to do that anymore, so we have to do it for her." Marcus closed the vigil with words that cut through the cold December night. Aaliyah's story is not just her own. It's the story of every black woman who's been told to wait, to be patient, while the clock runs out on their safety. We will not wait anymore. We will not be silent, because every black life matters, not just in the headlines, but in the quiet moments when no one is watching. He paused, scanning the crowd. If you believe that, don't just feel it tonight. Carry it, speak it, share it. Make sure the next time someone calls for help, they get it. And if you want to keep hearing the truth, the kind that forces change, stand with us. Stand together. The crowd murmured in agreement, candles held higher. In the flickering light, the bench with Aaliyah's name seemed to glow. And in that moment, Milford felt not healed, but awake. This was not the end. It was the beginning of a louder fight. A fight for justice, for dignity, and for the black truths that must never be buried again.